Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at Grace today. My name is Nate Nims. If we haven't met yet, it is good to be with you on this Easter Sunday. So thank you for being with us here in the sanctuary, or for everybody that is with us online. For the folks here, hopefully you got a bulletin on your way in. If not, you can raise your hand and usher will get you one, and you can follow along with the service on the screen. For everybody watching online, the bulletin and more is available on our website at gracedesmoines.org. But just a couple of things to highlight and announce as we get started. In your bulletin, there's a little connection card in there. If you can fill it out, it lets us know you're here, and it can help us get you connected to the church. And if you have any questions or want to learn more about ways you can get involved, you can fill that out and let us know. For everybody here, you can fill that out and put it in one of the baskets by the doors on your way out later in the service. For folks online, leave a comment in the service and we'll respond to you. So thank you for being with us. Then our Easter offering today, there's an envelope that we've got for that. At Grace, we believe and we proclaim that without condition and without exception, God loves all. And every year at Easter and other special services throughout the year, such as Christmas and Thanksgiving, we give the offering to an organization or a cause in the community that makes a difference. And this year, we are giving the Easter offering to Iowa Safe Schools to support the work that they do to welcome and take care of LGBTQIA students in the state. So if you would like to support that work through Grace, you can do so with that offering envelope or through giving online at gracedesmoines.org. Then finally, there's a lot of announcements and things coming on that you can read about in the bulletin, but one thing that you can't read about there that is coming up is if you come to Grace next week, you might have to take a different route because the Drake Road races are taking place next weekend, so Kingman and some of the side streets around Grace will be blocked off during the day, so watch the roads, and we've got maps if you are interested by the door as you can plot your route to come here. But thank you all for being here on this Easter Sunday, and as we begin the service, Jenna will lead us in our call to worship.
Please rise and body your spirit as you're able for the call to worship. Out of grief and despair comes a message of hope. Christ has risen. We come to the tomb to see for ourselves, and it is true. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed.
We hear a voice call our name, and we know our risen Lord is with us now and always. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Please join me in singing our open hymn, number 302 in the red hymnal, Christ the Lord is risen today. Let us join together in reciting the opening prayer that is printed in the bulletin and will be on the screen. God, when everything was dark and it seemed like the sun would never shine, your love broke through. The light of your love shined and spread and burst forth with resurrection. Gracious God, we praise you for the light of new life made possible through Jesus. We praise you for the light of new life that shone on the first witnesses of resurrection. We praise you for the light of new life that continues to shine in our hearts today. We pray that the Easter light of life, hope, and joy will live in us each day, and that we will be bearers of that light into the lives of others. Amen.
And as we celebrate the light and this love and the hope and promise of Easter, we're going to take a bit of time to greet one another with grace and peace. So extend the love of this day to one another with signs of greeting as you say hello to folks now. And folks online, welcome. I invite you to find your spots, and we can continue greeting one another after the service as well. There's coffee, tea, treats, lemonade, a whole bunch of goodies that you can share with each other and say grace and peace to with each other and get to know folks that way later in the service. But now we are going to do the flowering of the cross. So we'll invite children of all ages to come up and help flower the cross, and then we'll raise it after the children are done putting the flowers in. We'll be singing a few hymns while the flowering is taking place. So the hymns that we'll be singing are 307, 312, and 318. They're going to be up on the screen, but if you would like to help with the flowering of the cross, we'll start singing together. You can remain seated as we do, and we'll start flowering the cross and celebrating Easter with one another together.
Christ
Today's scripture reading is from John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. Early in the morning of the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. She ran to Simon, Peter, and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord from the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." Peter and the other disciple left to go to the tomb. They were running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter and was the first to arrive at the tomb. Bending down to take a look, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he didn't go in. Following him, Simon and Peter entered the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying there. He also saw the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head. It wasn't with the other clothes, but was folded up in its own place. Then the other disciple, the one who arrived at the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They didn't yet understand the scripture that Jesus must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to the place where they were staying. Mary stood outside the tomb, crying. As she cried, she bent down to look into the tomb. She saw two angels dressed in white, seated where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head and one at the foot. The angels asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She replied, "They have taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him." As soon as she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she replied, "Sir, if you had carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him, "Rabboni," which means teacher in Aramaic, I think. She said to her, "Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father. Go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I'm going up to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene left and announced to the disciples, "I've seen the Lord." Then she told them what he said to her.
So even if you're not religious, you got to appreciate Jesus at least a little bit. Because when he's born, you get a gift. And when he dies, you get chocolate. So at the very least, you gotta have something in favor for him. And of course we have chocolate on Easter because chocolate is brown. The cross is made out of wood. Wood is typically brown, so it all just fits together nice and neat. Now it was early in the morning on that first day of the week, while it was still dark, that we read Mary Magdalene came to the tomb. And Mary was not expecting a miracle. She was there to grieve. Today was going to be a day of mourning where it was just another day that had been stained by disappointment and despair. But Mary showed up early while it was still dark and was the first one to show up. Now, the male disciples, the guys that got book deals after all of this, they didn't show up with Mary, right? Mary showed up with her grief and her loss. All those folks that had deserted or were disappointed, most of them stayed home, but Mary showed up and started the church lady tradition of showing up. So well done, my sisters. Now, Mary, she didn't just show up, she also stuck around, because John tells us that Peter and the beloved disciple also go to the tomb with Mary, but they see that it's empty. They start to get worried and afraid. They assume the worst, and so they run away. But Mary stays put. In the midst of all her loss, she lingers a little bit longer. She doesn't distract herself from her grief. She doesn't go to the next thing to keep her busy instead of dwelling in her loss. And maybe that's why she's the first person to see this resurrection. Because in this life, whenever we show up, wherever we show up, there's always a bit of mystery to what's going to happen next. I mean, you probably have a general plan for the rest of your day and how things are going to go, but you can't control or dictate everything that's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And then we can take things even further, because beyond the day-to-day mystery and uncertainty to life, all of the surprises that come our way, in the grand scheme of things, we all just appeared here. And none of us asked to appear here and be born. We were all dropped into this storyline and just given our spot in the plot. It was a few years ago in India that a guy named Raphael Samuel sued his parents for giving birth to him. If you can't tell in that picture, there's a little blurb that says he is a part of the Voluntary Human Extinction Group. So that's fun. He said in an interview, "My life has been amazing, but I don't see why I should put another life through the rigmarole of school and finding a career, especially when they didn't ask to exist." In his lawsuit, Raphael tried to argue that because he did not consent to his birth, his parents should have to pay him monthly for the rest of his life because he didn't ask for this existence, and it's all their fault. Right? He's suing for emotional damages for being born. Now, both of Raphael's parents were lawyers, and they took things fairly well, all things considered. His mother said in an interview around the trial that if Raphael could come up with a rational explanation as to how we could have sought his consent to be born, I will accept my fault. But then she went on to say in that same interview, "I am very happy that my son has grown up into a fearless, independent thinking young man. He is sure to find his path to happiness." But I think Raphael's, anybody watch Mad Men a few years ago? There was that quote in Mad Men that Don Draper said once about, you are born alone and you die alone and this world drops rules on top of you. I think that's the kind of person Raphael is, sort of a downer. And that quote's wrong anyways, because if you're born, at least one other person is with you. Right? Like, you are not born alone. You are born in a community. And if you're born in a hospital, you're born with like 6 people passing you around before you eventually get to your mother. Right? None of us are born alone. We are born into this community. And Raphael, he said, "My life is amazing, but I didn't ask for it." It was a publicity stunt for him, and he just wanted to make the point that life is hard, and that we don't ask for the difficulties that come our way. They just happen to us, and we have to deal for them even when we didn't ask them. Pain and tragedy, they will strike us no matter what. And the problem of pain is something that we all deal with. Like even Jeffrey Bezos, one of the wealthiest people in the world who helped to deliver quite a few Easter baskets this weekend, even Jeff has some problems with pain. And I really wonder, at what point with your billions do you decide that you want to look like a Bond villain? Like, at what point in your life do you want to think, yes, I could be Goldfinger? Right? Like, but he's more or less left Amazon behind, and now he's focusing on another company, Blue Origin. Now, every now and then, I get jealous of Jeffrey's billions of dollars, but then, do you remember how adorable he looked with his cowboy hat and spacesuit? Like, oh, it's just so cute, right? Isn't he just a huggable billionaire and oligarch that's ruining all our lives? Oh, just precious. But Jeffrey Bezos, he is investing in Blue Origin because he said that eventually we're going to have to leave this earth behind. In an interview in Business Insider, he said the earth is finite. And if the world economy and population is to keep expanding, then space is the only way to go. Jeff thinks that the only way to continue this life is by escaping the only life that we have known. And he kind of has a point, because if we keep treating creation as if it is a commodity to be used instead of a gift to be cherished, then we're going to have to go somewhere else. But will going somewhere else change us? If we pack up a rocket ship to Mars, will we just bring all of our pains and all of our problems with us when we leave? Like, as much as a change of scenery can be nice, will that change of scenery really solve all of our issues or our problems? Now, in life, some folks look to a spaceship, but others look to a Savior, and we're all looking for some hope to get us out of the pain and struggle that we're dealing with. And no matter where we look for that hope or how we look for that hope or search for grace and love and peace, we have this need within us that says we want something more. We need something to solve this. There is a longing and a desire and an inner ache that lures us towards a love that we keep reaching out for. Like, we want resurrection. We want that change of scenery, but what do we really expect from it? There was a woman named Katie, and Katie's an architect in Boston. She worked for a firm for 8 years, and in the end of that 8th year, Katie got pregnant. Katie's had 3 kids since then, and the good news is that none of them has sued her yet. Like, her oldest is just on the verge of 13, so anything could happen. But so far, the kids haven't sued her for being born. Now, Katie and her husband, they wanted to start a family together, and when they did the math of Katie working, her husband working, and them paying for childcare along the way, and those costs, they canceled each other out. So Katie decided to put her career on hold and stay at home with the kids. So for 12 years and 3 kids later, Katie put her career on pause, but eventually all the kids were in school, at least enough, where she got the itch to think, I don't need to stay at home alone anymore. Now, she wasn't sure how to get her foot back into the door, but she knew she had a lot of skills that she had to dust off, so Katie started drawing architecture sketches and posting them on Instagram every day, just as a habit to rebuild her portfolio and to get her skills back in place. She didn't have a portfolio, so she created one. And she was excited to go back to work, but she was a bit terrified as well because she gave up every professional dream that she had to be a mom, and now she was struggling to give herself permission to have a life again. So she was wrestling with all these thoughts in her head of, what are my friends, the other stay-at-home moms, going to think of me now that I'm going back to work? And what are my children going to think if I say I'm busy and I can't come to see them? What are folks going to think about me? Is anybody going to judge me? She didn't know what to do. And then on top of that, all of the technology had moved on without her. Firms were using different drafting technology, and she didn't know how to use it because she'd been at home for 12 years. So she went back to school for a semester. She got a continuing education certificate. She had a portfolio of stuff that she posted on Instagram, and she started to apply for jobs. And in about 2 weeks, she got an offer to be a staff architect at a firm. Then it was everything that she wanted, and then after 3 months, she was called into a meeting with the firm's partners, and they offered her a promotion to be their project manager. So she was out of work for 12 years. She got hired in a week, and then 3 months later, she got the promotion that she always wanted, and she was very confused by all of this. And she asked, why are you promoting me? And they said, because you're already doing the work. Sometimes in our lives, we can't see the ways that we are transforming. Because over 12 years, Katie started to become an expert at managing crises and making decisions and multitasking and problem solving and working with others. Being a mom taught her skills that working in business in Boston never could. And Katie felt like she finally had everything. All of her life was coming together. She could have it all. But that's not the end of her story. Because over the next year, Katie started to hate her job. She didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. Things were becoming unmanageable. The expectations that were put on her were unreasonable. She dreaded going to work, and she would cry in the office bathroom most lunch breaks, trying to tell herself that the afternoon would get better. And the sad thing is, Katie wasn't the only one that was crying in the bathrooms, because her boss had this habit of asking women to go into the office by themselves so that they could be yelled at. And then on the floor, the boss would go out and yell at the men in the office because he thought public shame was best for them to get them to work a little better. So everybody dreaded working with this boss because if you were called into the office or if you saw the boss out of the office, you knew somebody was going to get torn apart. Now, Katie was used to crying and tears and somebody throwing a temper tantrum at her. Like, she had 3 kids. She could put up with that. She could put up with someone being childish. She could put up with all of that corporate stuff, but she just couldn't take it anymore. She came to realize over that year that the desire and the dream that she had for her life wasn't really the dream that she needed for her life. The life she had was not the life that she wanted. And she said, you graduate from college, you work as an architect, you're like, I'm an architect, that's my life, this is everything. And then you have family, you have friends, and you think, this is amazing. So then it becomes a battle of, how do I work this out? Now, Katie worked things out ultimately by quitting. She wasn't the first, but she quit, and she had a lot of folks that quit right after her, leaving that firm behind. And because she had a few contracts, she said, I'm going to become a Mike Brady architect. If you don't know, Mike Brady, dad on the Brady Bunch, he had an office at home. And so Katie and her partner, they did the math. They knew they couldn't stay where they lived, so they downsized. Her dream to be a mom and to have an office that overlooked the Boston Common wasn't her dream anymore. So now she has a very cramped, small corner office in their apartment that on nights and weekends also is the playroom for the kids. And she just told herself, if Mike Brady can do it, I'm going to try. So she tried, and she keeps trying. And in our lives, that kind of cycle happens to us all because there's a dream that we have in mind, and we keep striving for it. We keep working for it. We think we have this deepest desire, and then our hearts break. But then there is this sort of resurrection that rekindles desire and dreams and longing in a new way. And there is this resurrection that we are all being lured to. And when we're young, we dream of doing amazing things. We dream of all the things that we could be when we grow up. Maybe like Jeff Bezos, you thought, I will be an astronaut and a cowboy at the same time. When you're a kid, you have that dream for your life, but most likely your dream does not include taxes, which are due tomorrow. So, not to be a downer on Easter, but pay up, right? And taxes are great. We're all better for roads and sidewalks and schools and all of those things, but when you're a kid, you don't dream about taxes and TPS reports and all the things that come with living out your childhood dream, and you feel that death, you feel that loss. We all have that death of a plan or a relationship or a job. We have the death of a hobby. I don't know about you, I have the death of the thought that spring will ever feel like spring. Right? Like, things die all around us. And on the other side of death, if we can linger like Mary around the tomb, if we don't rush to the next thing, if we don't just simply move on and distract ourselves, if we dwell a little bit, then maybe like Mary, we can hear Christ say our names. And to me, that's the most profound moment in this telling of the gospel story from John. Mary, in her grief, hears her name and she sees the gardener. And John writes the gardener, not a gardener. And this is a pretty big wink and a nod for John. Like, huh? You get it? Right? John is making a reference. But Mary doesn't seem to be in the mood for a pun, but then she's punished by one anyway. Mary sees this gardener, and in her grief, she's not able to see Jesus. Like, in this moment in the Gospel of John, Mary's faith feels more like cataracts than clarity. She is not able to see things. And so she says to the gardener, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Mary is not messing around. She doesn't seem to be in the best of moods. She wants to grieve. She wants to do one more act of kindness and respect for her rabbi, teacher, and friend. She thinks the dream is over. And then she hears the gardener say her name. Now, biblical authors, especially in the Gospels, they do a lot of allusions and references to other passages. John doesn't want us just to know that Mary is called by her name. John wants us to be called back to the beginning, to the goodness of creation. There's a point that John makes that he doesn't want us to miss, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This poetry from Genesis unfolds with this goodness and creativity and passion and joy, and everything that is created, God says it is good. So the image that John wants to give us of resurrection is that it is a new beginning that turns a grave into a garden. That resurrection is a new beginning that can bloom even in the midst of a tomb, that there is this love that will always break through. And when Mary showed up, she didn't expect or even seem to want a miracle. She was ready for that grave. She was raw with grief, but while it was still dark, while Mary was still angry and sad and hopeless, she heard her name called and was called back to the goodness and the hope and the blessing that we have all been created for. When Mary showed up that first Easter, she was wounded and weary. Her plans, her purpose, everything that she counted on was gone. But then she hears her name and sees the resurrected Christ holding out their still crucified hands. And she's called back to this garden where everything can bloom. The late, great Henry Nouwen put it like this: nobody escapes being wounded. We are all wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The main question is not how do we hide our wounds so we don't have to be embarrassed, but how can we put our woundedness in the service of others? When our wounds cease to be the source of shame and become a source of healing, we have become wounded healers. It is from our wounds and our vulnerabilities that we find our resurrection. Resurrection is not this philosophical or theological amusing, because wounds are never amusing. It is not a thought exercise. It is a reality that we are broken. We have sutures and stitches that attempt to hold together our scars. There are wounds that haven't healed, and our hearts are broken in ways that cannot be concealed. And then there is this cross that becomes the symbol of all of our shames and hurts and wounds publicly displayed and laid bare. And that cross that Christ was crucified on was not God's invention, but ours. It was not God's form of punishment. It was the punishment that we put on one another, because when we cannot transform our pain, we simply transmit it to one another. So for all of our need for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, in all of the ways that we wound ourselves and wound others because we are just casting stones at each other, I have to wonder if Christ looked at the cross and saw that sacrifice as an answer to our wrath and rage, where the cross becomes a symbol of God's love, that even when God is hurt, even when Christ is hurt, this becomes a conduit of grace. That instead of taking a sword against us, Jesus takes a sword into his side and says, forgiveness is yours. Today you will be with me in paradise. Jesus takes on all of the rage and the abandonment and the doubts and the questions and the hurt and the harm and the loss that could be thrown at him. And in response, Jesus offers forgiveness and grace and calls Mary by name. Like that cross, this love, this resurrection, it's a bit of a mystery. And we don't always like mysteries. I'm a fan of Agatha Christie because she ties everything together. Right? There's no mystery remaining at the end of an Agatha Christie story. But with the cross, and how does hurt become hope? And how does the loss of the cross become a symbol of God's solidarity and love? Easter is this mystery that cannot be reduced to a history lesson with a tidy ending, because resurrection is still unfolding around us and within us, because like Mary, we show up in the dark with our questions, with our grief, facing death, and then we hear God call us by name, and we're invited to look through death in all of its disguises so that we might see life on the other side. Resurrection doesn't just happen. You are a resurrection. Your faith, your joy, your dreams, your peace, all that you have felt, when it dies, it is resurrected because you are here, overcoming, enduring, pressing on, becoming the person that hears you, hears your name. Jesus' resurrection, it didn't end. It gets extended in all directions, expanding and abounding as we hear our name, especially when we are in the dark. It comes as this promise that the worst thing will not be the last thing, that we can turn graves into gardens, that resurrection will happen every time somebody works 2 jobs so their family can eat. The resurrection happens every time someone refuses to be treated as less than worthy, sacred, and beloved. Resurrection happens every time you say someone's name and know they need to hear it. Resurrection happens when you show up in the dark with rage and anger and disappointment and you sit in it instead of running away from it. Resurrection happens all around us. And for most of the last 2 years, this physical space, this church has been in the dark. There were times in those last 2 years where we wanted to find Jesus in the church, but we couldn't because all of the doors were locked and sealed like a tomb. And yet, what many of us discovered throughout the pandemic is that love, like Christ, cannot be controlled by locked doors or by a tomb. We found our way to a grave and then still found our way to a garden. Because we felt and we found the resurrected Christ on walks and hikes and all of the ways that we tried to be with one another, even when we were apart, through those teddy bear hunts. And who remembers doing the drive-by birthday parades, right? We had all of these ways that we said we might be locked up, we might be separated, we might be in tombs, but we are still going to shine a love through, and nothing can stop it. And for the past 2 Easters, this church was closed and locked up like a tomb. And when online school and Zoom meetings and trying to say goodbye to loved ones over the phone because you couldn't be at the hospital with them, in the midst of everything that was overwhelming and awful, Jesus was there with us, reminding us that church is wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, even if those 2 or 3 are you, your cat, and a laptop. Right? This kept going. Resurrection kept abounding because Christ calls us by name. And so my hope and my prayer is that we might never forget the ways that we, like Mary, are greeted in the midst of our fear and confusion and loss and grief, and that on that path, Christ comes to us in the dark and says, this grave can become a garden. Your wound will become a place where you can bloom once more. So may you bloom. May you transform and become the resurrection that Jesus is calling you to be. At this time, we'll respond to this resurrection with the offering and the anthem. If you want to support the work of Grace and the work that we're going to do with Iowa Safe Schools, you can use that Easter envelope. For folks online, you can give online at gracedesmoines.org. And to say a bit about how we are using your offerings and supporting the community and the church, Jenna's going to say a few words.
Sorry, choir, you might be standing for a little bit, not too long. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Jenna Picorni. You probably saw me in the little chancel choir or in the dinner drama or in the youth group. I am now back in Des Moines serving as the ad board chair, and so far it's been a really good time, and I've really enjoyed it. I was going to just give a list of the joys that we've experienced as a church. Something that I have really experienced, and I think this church is experiencing, I really want to hit on is, Nate, you said that we are the resurrection. And I know it was very difficult for a lot of churches the past 2 years, and I'm very grateful to have grown up with Grace and to be back at Grace. And we are the resurrection, and I am just really enjoyed being here and want to share some of the ways in which we are the resurrection and we are resurrecting. So you probably have gotten lots of emails and letters from me saying, hey, do you want to give to the church? Because of your generous donations this year, we have been able to double the apportionments giving that we gave versus 2020. We have increased the educational programming budget for this year. We have put $50,000 to improving the technology, so hopefully the Wi-Fi doesn't go down all the time and we can be a more hybrid church for the future. We were able to give a $30,000 donation to the Central Iowa Shelter and Services in Bidwell Riverside at the end of 2021. We were able to increase staff pay for the year. I think this is the second, maybe third year in a row that we've been able to do that. And so when I look back on all of those accomplishments, I see how we are coming out of this and we are the resurrection. And I'm very happy to be the lay leader of this church and to continue to grow this year. If you haven't given or haven't pledged this year, please consider doing so. And if you want to give, you can give at gracedesmoines.org. Thanks.
Would you join me in prayer? Christ, you are risen indeed, and in the midst of our graves and darkness, show us the garden that you want to bloom. In the midst of our wounds, let us remember that you still carry those from your cross and you give us healing through them. And we might not be able to make sense of this mystery, but we know it is the source of our salvation because your love pours forth always into our lives. So help us this day and always to remember that we too are a resurrection, that your spirit and power is grace with us. All this and more we pray through Christ, who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, and we'll join in our closing hymn. It's number 304, Easter People, Raise Your Voices. So as you go into this new week, may you see the gardener and hear your name. May you be ready to be surprised by what God will do next and how resurrection will continue to unfold around you. So may you look for the resurrected Christ with those that you meet as the Spirit nudges and guides you towards grace and peace, because the tomb is empty and Christ is out in the world, turning every grave into a garden, and now we get to go out into the world and do the same too. So with the joy and wonder of Easter, may we go forth knowing that every day to us is Easter, and with its resurrection song, we go in peace. Grace and peace, everyone. Thanks for being with us this Easter. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed.
Amen.